Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us this week on Market Journal. 3 things happened this past week that made it officially spring. Tornado sirens rang out in eastern Nebraska as a storm rolled through the area. 2, more than 50,000 people gathered in Memorial Stadium to witness a scrimmage. White won, by the way. And 3, planters are beginning to roll in some portions of the state. That is where we're going to kick things off today, as many producers around the Midwest are gearing up to get in the fields and plant this year's crop. There are a number of things you'll want to consider before you get in the planter and put that seed in the ground. We recently spoke with Mike Hinrichs of Hinrichs Seed in Shickley, Nebraska, to discuss what producers should be focusing on as they get ready to tackle another busy planting season. When it comes to planting crops, it all starts with the soil. You'll want to make sure you've had your soil tested to ensure you're not committing resources in areas where they're not required.
You're right. The number one thing we can do as a manager to start things off as agronomists and seed dealers, we got to know what's going on in the soil. None of this matters if our pH isn't right, if our phos isn't right. If we don't know those answers, we're right out of the gate. We're already shooting ourselves in the foot. So guys need to make sure that they have soil tests and that they're accurate at the right depth, and then make sure we're feeding that crop the way we need to, or else it's all for naught.
If you happen to be planting hybrid varieties, you'll also want to make sure you've got good rapport with your seed dealer and agronomist to ensure you're using the proper seed and seeding rates in the most effective fields for your seed.
One thing I try to get a hold of all my guys is make sure we're planting the right hybrid on the right piece of ground. Everybody every year always seems they want the plot winner, but the plot winner doesn't necessarily need to go in the lowest, toughest ground we have. So sit down with your seed dealer, make sure that you're putting the tough hybrid that goes in the swamp ground and the high yielding hybrid on your best farm. Whatever, if you got high pH, make sure you got a hybrid that handles that high pH. And then populations. If your agronomist or your seed dealer isn't doing your prescriptions, if you're doing yourself, ask for a planting guide. I always try to give guys planting rates of, if your yield goals are 250 and above, here's your planting rate. If your yield goal is 230, here's a different planting rate. Make sure you go through that with your seed dealer and your agronomist to make sure you're doing the right hybrid and then the right seeding for that hybrid on that field.
Some days planting may seem like an endless task, but as quick as it starts, it is finished. Once your seed has been properly sown, given the severity of the drought we've seen all across the state this year, there are some things you'll want to watch over the next few weeks for your crop as it begins to emerge.
With the dry weather we've had, since we're kind of going through a drought, I know we've picked up some rain here lately, but still the one thing that's going to be on my mind, probably V2, V3 corn, is anhydrous burn. Even if we put it on in the fall or the spring, be looking for, I always look for, there's a purple plant. If you got a purple plant, something's going on underneath, dig it up. You can probably see anhydrous burn or root burn. It'll be little brown tips at the end. If we have anhydrous burn, dry land, you pray for rain. Irrigation, what I found that works really nice is I put a 1/2 inch on really fast to kind of cool that zone down a little bit, and then I'll come back again right away with another 3/4 inch just to see if we can't introduce a little bit more moisture and calm that anhydrous down a little bit for some anhydrous burn. Second thing is I'm going to be looking for is herbicide carryover. Again, it goes back to the drought. We haven't had a lot of moisture to help break down some of these herbicides that we might have sprayed into June, 1st of July, that have a lot of residual, and we're changing that crop rotation over. With the lack of moisture, that can be an issue. So I definitely go out and look at the corn and soybeans and see if we can't find some of those herbicide carryovers.
Thanks to Mike for taking the time out of his schedule to answer our questions this week. If you have any questions when it comes to the upcoming growing season, you can stay up to date with the latest tips and suggestions offered online at cropwatch.unl.edu. Turning our attention over to the grain markets now, President Joe Biden made a trip to an Iowa ethanol plant this past week to make an announcement that he hopes will ease fuel prices. With dried distillers' grains behind him, Biden said that his administration would sign an emergency order to ensure 15% ethanol would remain in fuel pumps this summer. Without that waiver, E15 is not allowed to be sold around most of the country from June 1st until September 15th. Joining us now is Luke Beckman of Central Valley Ag to discuss that announcement as well as the other factors impacting the markets. Luke, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here, Bryce. Thank you.
Luke, talk about this announcement. Did it impact the corn market as that news came out?
I certainly think it added to the bullish aura that we really have around the corn market and grains and oilseeds. It's not going to make a giant impact just in terms of outright corn demand, but it certainly is positive if you think about the margin environment that the ethanol producer finds themselves in. Really, our stocks, as you look at the weekly ethanol report, we're sitting on a fairly high level of ethanol stocks, and part of that's logistical issues, related to moving product and how rail performance has been. But certainly it's a positive development, Bryce, as we look at, pushing more ethanol into gasoline consumption and blending it into our fuel supply. Reality is 1.5% of our retail fuel locations across the U.S. carry and offer E15, so it's not a huge amount. If you really wanted to get down to the numbers and how to quantify how it's going to impact corn demand, if you do the math and make a few assumptions about how much gasoline demand, what that's going to look like this summer, you're really talking about 12 to 15 million bushels of corn production, additional corn production that's going to go through the ethanol channel because of this E15 announcement this summer. So certainly it's a positive development, and it's going to help certainly push corn and can keep the bulls fed as we continue to find higher prices.
Luke, you hinted at what I wanted to ask you next. I hear the word temporary when it comes to this waiver. Is that only addressing this summer, or do we know the long-term impact if we could see E15 year-round?
I think the emergency status of this really makes it a summer play for the administration, certainly scrambling a little bit with all the inflationary pressures and high gasoline prices. And certainly as we head into the midterms, it's an opportunity to appease farm country as we look at using more corn-based ethanol in our fuel supply. So as of right now, it feels like a temporary situation, but it could certainly help corn ethanol demand land on some stable footing if we could change that blending rate from E10 to E15 permanently, but no signs of that currently.
Let's talk about inflation. Of course, that continues to be on the front of mind for traders as they look at these markets. What's your take on how inflation is currently impacting the commodity prices, Luke?
Well, we're sitting here talking about ethanol and talking about E15. We talk about prices at this level. I mean, really, corn futures today, Wednesday up 5.5 cents. July futures at 7.78. We're paying $8 cash corn in different parts of the Corn Belt today. We even were earlier this week, and you would certainly think with $8 cash corn that we would be cutting into demand, and we're really not. We just got done talking about ethanol. If you're going to consume more ethanol gallons into our fuel supply, it's certainly going to support their margin structure. So as you look at inflation, we got consumer price inflation data and producer price index inflation data this week, and 8.5% on the CPI, 11.2% on the producer price index for a 12-month rolling average on that index. Those are some high numbers, highest we've seen since 1981 on the CPI, and the highest number we've had in the data set for the producer price index since they've been keeping track of that. So inflation is really not slowing down. So until inflation can abate a little bit, we're just not hurting demand or slowing down demand, and that's evident in ethanol margins. It's ethanol and livestock feeding margins, although those are getting a little bit tighter. But overall, these values are not slowing down our consumption.
Luke, you mentioned the prices currently for corn and soybeans. As we look at those and you look back on other years, are you seeing any trends when it comes to seasonal patterns?
Absolutely. We typically see that in our row crop markets. We tend to find seasonal highs between April and July. We're just getting into that time of the year where the market's going to be concerned about getting a crop planted How does that crop condition look as that crop comes out of the ground? So this year, there's certainly some added anxiety around that, especially with the acreage number that we got at the end of March from the USDA, specifically as it relates to corn. Those acreage numbers are less than what corn consumers wanted to see as we look at the balance sheet and we deal with uncertainty in the Black Sea region and what we're going to have for production there. So seasonally, this market has everything that it needs to hold true to seasonal price patterns, that being, finding a high at some point in the next, 90 days certainly seems realistic. And, this corn market's been up 5 days in a row, D's 23, we've had 18 days of consecutive higher closes. So the market is certainly responding to a bullish set of acreage information and a planting season really hasn't gotten an early start. It's not late by any means. But the market's certainly going to be sensitive to making sure that this crop gets planted timely and then it gets off to a good start.
Luke, I want to give you the final word this week. When it comes to all these factors you're talking about, what kind of marketing suggestions are you offering to producers when it comes to marketing their grain right now?
Well, we want to encourage producers to make sure you have a handle on your costs. We talked about inflation. We know that it's going to cost more to produce a crop this year, and there's a lot of uncertainty about how to produce a crop in 2023, despite some attractive pricing opportunities that far out. But if you know your costs, it's going to give you confidence to execute. We certainly know that it's dry in the Western Corn Belt, and we've had that as part of our daily conversations with producers to make sure that you understand what crop insurance policy that you have and how that policy protects you and allows you to market your grain in an environment where it is dry. We're safely above those spring insurance prices of $5.90 on corn and $14.33 on soybeans. If you have a revenue-based insurance policy with a harvest price option, you should be able to market up to your insured levels with confidence. And we want to make sure producers are taking advantage of these revenue opportunities, even if they're in a dry land scenario. So if you're confused about that, we'd encourage you to make sure you have a conversation with your crop insurance agent so that you recognize what that policy is doing for you so that you can take advantage of some of these really attractive new crop prices, even in a dry land production scenario.
A lot of things to keep an eye on, Luke. Appreciate you joining us here on Market Journal this week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks to Luke for his time and expertise this week. If you have any questions you'd like for me to ask one of our future analysts, you can always get in contact with us on social media or email, and we'll be sure to pass those questions along. Moving on now, Mark Twain hit the nail on the head when he said, buy land, they're not making it anymore. According to the findings of the University of Nebraska Lincoln's 2022 Farm Real Estate Market Survey, the value of agricultural land in the Cornhusker State increased by an average of 16% over the prior year. We recently sat down with agricultural systems economist and extension educator Jim Jansen to walk through the latest report. Well, the big headline this year is that we've got a 16% increase over the prior year to a new statewide average of $3,360. Talk about some of the factors that are driving land prices higher across the entire state of Nebraska.
Yeah, so based off our survey work, we survey people that work in the Nebraska land industry. What they reported, there were basically 3 or 4 factors leading to the current real estate market values that we have reported. One of the biggest drivers being current commodity prices, corn, soybeans, wheat, whatever the crop or small grain might be across the state. Second major factor was low interest rates. Obviously, inflation is a concern right now, and there may be moves by the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates. But right now, or over the last year or so, there's been very competitive interest rates you could get on land purchases, residential, machinery, whatever the case might be. Also, another thing is called the 1031 exchange, and there's been a renewed interest or push to see that used in land sales and purchases. 1031 exchange, what that is when someone sells a parcel of ground, say in a neighboring state, if you inherited something, you can turn around and take that capital, take that money, and repurchase another parcel of ground. Maybe it's closer to you, maybe it's in your home state, whatever the case might be. So those were some of the biggest factors that we're kind of seeing across the state of Nebraska related to current market value of land and some of the things. And also on the topic of interest rates, we've seen people are purchasing assets right now because of the fear of inflation. We haven't seen substantial inflation in recent history, but there's been a push to buy tangible things. If you don't buy machinery, equipment, land, whatever the case might be, there's a fear that next year, if you can even get it, it's going to cost more. So people are looking as land as a store of wealth. If you're concerned about inflation, some people take a look at buying assets or buying a business. And land is a business. It definitely has income and it does have expenses.
This was the biggest increase we've seen in land values here in Nebraska since 2014. When you put this study together, you break things down geographically, so you're able to show the trends across the state. Talk about how they vary east to west.
Yeah, so we divide the state into 8 agricultural statistic districts. Some people in the past may have heard of things called crop reporting districts. So there's 8 different regions across the state. Each region has similar production attributes, things like expectation for rainfall, yield, soil type, maybe to a degree the amount of slope on the parcels of ground. With that, what we've seen, we track, I believe it's 7 or 8 different types of land. We've seen a lot of strength percentage-wise, percent increases. We've seen a lot of strength in the eastern part of the state, as well as other areas of the state that have a high presence of cropland. Without a doubt, the prices being much higher right now for corn, soybeans, wheat, whatever you might be growing in your area, the degree of profitability, what people are seeing, it's much different than it was 2 years ago. Now, to couple with that, we're dealing with higher input expenses, and we're having to sort that out. And if you're on the livestock side of the deal, prices have been better. There's been some changes in the prices, but without a doubt, drought is going to be a big concern. So we're seeing a lot of different factors into that, but overall across the state we're seeing pretty strong percentage changes. You got to keep in mind when you look at the percent increase on something, what is the difference related to the percent increase for, say, western Nebraska dryland cropland versus northeast Nebraska irrigated cropland? There's can be some big differences there in some of the things that we have seen reported.
Big differences, but again, the headline story is that everything is up this year as we look at that survey. Were there any particular surprises for you as you put this report together when it comes to the value of land?
You know, the last time we seen land peak like this was back in 2014. There are some very strong similarities between what happened, say, between late 2011 to 2014 versus maybe late 2021 to where we are currently. Drought, anytime we have drought in a big area, maybe across the Corn Belt this year, whatever, we'd see a strong run up in commodity prices. Interest rates back in 2011-12 were on the downhill slope at that time because of the housing crisis of 2008, 9, and 10. And I was very surprised to see there's some very strong similarities being reported between that period of time, roughly a decade ago, versus where we're currently at right now.
If you would like to learn more about the recent survey as well as those findings, you can read the full report online at cap.unl.edu. We've also taken the liberty of posting a direct link to the Market Journal website. Well, it was not easy, and it certainly did not happen overnight, but the development of the modern Nebraska systems of natural resources districts has become the envy of many states. The NRD system as we know it today officially began with the passage of LB 1357 in the Nebraska legislature all the way back in 1969. That established a network of NRDs along river basins across the state, and the system went into full effect in July of 1972. This year, NRDs celebrate their 50th anniversary with a series of festivities and special activities scheduled all across the state. You can learn more about this in the March issue of the Nebraska Farmer. What is now time for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Well, Al, the temperature has been all over the place over the past couple of weeks. How are things looking as we turn to the week ahead?
Well, Bryce, we're definitely seeing quite a wild swing in temperatures this week, particularly as that storm system that resulted in the blizzard conditions open in North Dakota, northwestern South Dakota, eastern Montana, and northeastern portions of Wyoming. As a warm front lifted through eastern Nebraska, we've seen temperatures in the 40s jump rapidly up into the upper 80s, into the lower 90s, and quite a few records set across eastern Nebraska in terms of temperatures. Then, of course, the cold comes from sliding through the state. We've seen some very strong winds the entire day, but we've seen severe weather breakout in eastern Nebraska. And the first 2 confirmed tornado touchdowns of 2022 occurred, one near Seward and one near Unadalia. It does look like a little bit more benign conditions as we go through this next week. There are a couple chances for precipitation, but nothing major on the horizon. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we have in store. And the first thing I'll draw your attention to is that we got a trough over the Great Lakes, Ohio River Valley, ridging taking place here in the center part of the country, and some energy coming into the western United States. At the surface, low pressure over southeastern portions of Colorado, and another low pressure system over portions of southwestern Montana. That will keep most of the precipitation in the Pacific Northwest, and as we go through the overnight hours into tomorrow, that jet energy starts to slide through Nebraska, but the main precipitation band will remain up in North Dakota. Potentially, we will see another 3 to 6 inches up into this region, with most of it be the more significant being the north portions of the state. That will start to move rapidly toward the east, and we'll start to see ridging taking place. So we'll finally start to see a break in temperatures in southwest Nebraska, moving back up into the 60s. We're going to be primarily still in the 50s across most of the state until we get into Tuesday, but most of the precipitation with that system will be moving toward the Great Lakes region. And we get a weak little troughing pattern on Tuesday. Some of that energy may slide in to southeastern Nebraska and give us some precipitation as low pressure sits up over southeastern Colorado. Kind of see some of that moisture feeding in. It looks like the primary focus of this moisture is going to remain to the east and south of the state. By Wednesday, that trough will start to deepen as it moves toward the Great Lakes region, and sharp ridging starts to take place over the western high plains. High pressure system will slide toward the southeast. That'll keep us more on the backside. You can see some of that precipitation lingering in southeastern Nebraska. But more importantly, as we get into the 21st, next Thursday, we start to see massive ridging taking place, very warm conditions, and we probably will see widespread 60s and 70s across the state. As we get flow around the backside of this high, we'll probably be more in a southerly to southeasterly flow as that major precipitation shifts to the east. And on Friday, we continue that same track in terms of the temperatures, warmest in the southeast, cooler in the northwest as this low pressure system once again takes aim at North Dakota, South Dakota, with the primary precipitation on Friday will be mainly over the northern Rockies. Looking a little farther out into the future, that takes us to next Thursday to the following Tuesday. With that high pressure system in place, we're going to stay above normal for the most part during this period. And in terms of precipitation, it does look like above normal moisture. Right now, the GFS model is indicating between the 23rd and the 25th is where our most significant chance for moisture here across Nebraska will fall.
Thanks, Al. Last month, the University of Nebraska Lincoln announced plans to create the small meat processing plant of the future. This plant of the future will be a multi-disciplinary center that will seek to bolster the meat industry regionally. We recently caught up with the head of UNL's Animal Science Department, Clint Krehbiel, to get a better understanding of how this project will benefit the meat industry in the Cornhusker State. Market Journal's Bill Dodd brings us this story.
The University of Nebraska Lincoln's East Campus is planning on taking a step into the future with a newly renovated, state-of-the-art meat processing facility. Not only will this facility be a benefit to established and incoming students, but will also aim to help bolster the meatpacking industry on a regional scale.
Really looking at establishing a facility where those processors can come look at what a state-of-the-art facility might look like, really think about their current location and facility and how they may be able to leverage our resource to enhance everything from animal handling and welfare when animals arrive and are housed, clear through the abattoir and processing, and then considering going from live to end product, how that best flows in a facility for things like food safety and worker safety as well.
Constructed in 1957, the Lovell Meat Lab has taken part in some groundbreaking work since its inception. However, many portions of the facility have become dated throughout the many changes the meat processing industry and animal genetics have undergone over the years. These new additions will bring updated amenities for students and workers, as well as better handling areas for animals.
Particularly if we think about the animal handling and the abattoir space, that was finished in 1957. So type of animals have certainly changed, genetics have changed over that time. But thinking about, again, flow through a product, as you think about fabrication to primals down to processing, further processing for sausage making, et cetera, and then how that gets packaged and ultimately marketed, and that will involve some shipping of product out in addition to utilizing our current store footprint, or a new footprint actually, to be able to market product locally.
The COVID-19 pandemic has shed light on several weaknesses of our current meat processing practices. Those weaknesses include insufficient capacity of small processors to keep up with rising demand, as well as challenges with implementing new technologies and widespread workforce shortages. While the current facilities have been able to assist producers and meat processors through the pandemic, this new facility hopes to alleviate many of those concerns in the future.
During the pandemic, one of our pork producers, Bill Luckey, was faced with potentially having to depopulate animals because the packing plants or processing plants were shut down. And we were granted permission to harvest some market-ready hogs during that time. And we provided that product to the local food bank. So it was a really neat partnership between Nebraska pork producers, the Department of Animal Science or INR, and then the local food banks to make sure that we were getting product that was, again, ready to harvest into the hands of those that had need for that product. So we just want to be better prepared to be able to step up and fill that void should something similar happen in the future.
The upgrades to this facility will seek to combine academic programs with hands-on application that will help build deeper community partnerships that will in turn strengthen our region's economy by training students, as well as facilitating possible internship programs to help bolster our meat processing workforce.
We're thinking about those small plants that might be hiring new employees that could come and spend 3 days to a week here, again, to learn about the fabrication process, so all the way through cutting, and certainly food safety or product safety will be an important part of that training as well. So really all things related to the aspect of processing meat. So that's one way, is to bring workers here, but we also think about in hiring a new extension specialist to be able to go out and train workforce at those plants locally throughout the state of Nebraska. So both bringing them here, but also us going to them will be a part of that. And then, of course, we have the traditional aspect of what we've done well so many years, and that's trained students.
While UNL has been a leader in meat science for over 100 years, given the current challenges the meat industry has been faced with over the last couple of years, the University of Nebraska is building toward becoming a big part of that solution. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks for the story, Bill. Clint also tells us he anticipates that some of the workforce development programs could be in place by the fall of 2022 with the addition of programming and facility upgrades throughout the next several years. If you'd like to learn more about this project and how it will impact Nebraska's meat producers and processors, we've included a link to an informative article on this subject on the Market Journal website. Well, that is going to do it for this week's show. If you happen to miss a story, you can follow us on YouTube and on social media to catch up and join in on the conversation. We hope to see you back here next week. Until then, I'm Bryce Tuskett. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.